A few days ago in Nairobi, the county government decided to cut down a few large trees in order to get rid of some very huge birds that had made that tree their home. And the people of Twitter, the Kenyans on Twitter, really complained, and they made a very big deal about the fact that the county government had cut these trees. And this is a tradition of Kenyans to complain every single time the government cuts down any tree anywhere for any reason. I also remember during when they were building the expressway, and they cut down some trees along Mombasa Road, and a lot of people on Twitter also complained, and they were very bitter. And even previously, when the county government had cut down some trees along major highways in order to allow the billboards to be seen from the highways, people really complained. And so it appears that Kenyans don't like it when trees, especially old trees, are cut down for any reason. So this is a tradition of Kenyans on Twitter to complain about trees being cut, which is very impressive on the face of it. It shows that people, they really care about the environment and the things that are going on, and they are ready to protest, and they're ready to fight for the environment, and to make sure that everything is going on well, and to check the government anytime the government is doing what they feel is not correct with regards to the environment. And this is true to the extent to which it cuts across all ethnic lines. So it's something that can bring Kenyans together, complaining about or campaigning for the environment. So it's a very good thing. It's a point of unity for the people of Kenya, and for the males of Kenya, for the men of Kenya. It gives them an opportunity to show their masculinity, to show that they too can protest, they too can take a tough stand on an issue, and they do it from the safety of their their Twitter handles. They don't really go out in real life to protest. They do it from the comfort of their phones and their computers. Okay, with that being said, the new vice president, made a roadside declaration. He said that they will allow very poor farmers to go into forests, gazetted forests, and they'll allow them to do some kind of farming inside those forests on condition that they don't harm the trees. And this sort of thing has been done previously, whereby you get a useful symbiotic relationship between the poor farmers and the forests. Instead of having people jumping into the forest and trying to, cut down the trees or do poaching activities, it may be better to come up with a program whereby the locals, the people who live around the forest, can benefit from it without being criminalized. At the same time, they will act as lookouts and to stop poaching, because you have people permanently there, and the Kenya Wildlife Service or the Kenya Forestry Service may not be able to cover all forests at all times. So if you allow these indigent farmers to go in there and do some kind of farming, it may actually be beneficial. But again, the Kenyans on Twitter were up in arms. They were very angry and bitter, and they really complained. And this is what is going on. And and the men, the Kenyan men of Twitter, they felt brave condemning the decision by the new government to allow people, that is to allow African farmers into forested areas. And it's an ongoing debate, even as we speak right now. At any rate, I wanted to compare it with something. Now, the contrast is this. Anytime a single tree is cut in Kenya, the people complain bitterly. They complain really bitterly. But this complaining is only limited to condemning fellow Africans. You must understand the context. Now, Kenya is a slave society. Okay? And in a slave society, there are certain values that are dominant in a slave society, which is what makes it into a slave society. Now, in Kenya, the slave master, of course, is the Mzungu. So not only is the Mzungu the slave master, the Mzungu is also God. So that when you go into a temple of worship, it is a Mzungu being worshipped as God. Okay? So the Europeans are God. The Europeans are in heaven. Okay, if you go to heaven, it's only Europeans, and also the angels are Europeans. So you don't get to get into heaven, without the approval and invitation, of course, by Europeans. And if it's the other heaven, obviously it's the Arab, right? So with that being said, this is the religion of most people of Kenya. Now, we've established that the Mzungu is God. Now, the Mzungu is also the slave master, right? So in slave societies, the slave master cannot be criticized. You can't criticize God. You can't complain, against God. You can't say anything against God. And the Mzungu is God. Now, with that being said, there was an incident whereby the British went up to Mount Kenya and burned down almost 80% of it. And this was not very widely reported. It was reported, but it wasn't very widely reported. But the information came out, and the media did their best not to disclose that it's the British who burnt down, most of Mount Kenya forest. And it's a very ancient forest. It's a native forest, and it was a virgin forest. But most of it was burned down, right? And what was interesting, once the information came out, all the Twitter warriors, all the brave Kenyan men who are always, fighting for trees, anytime the city council or the county government cuts down a few trees for a project, they were nowhere to be found. Not a peep, not a sound, not a tweet, nothing. All the keyboard warriors disappeared. Not a single word of criticism directed toward the British who burned down Mount Kenya forest. Now, who are these British? These British were the British army that occupies Kenya. And what many people don't realize is that Kenya is the only country in the world that has been continuously occupied for more than 100 years. Ever since the British army invaded Kenya in the 1890s, they are still here. Okay, so it's been more than 130 years. And of course, there is not a single complaint from Kenyans. So it is this British army that went up to Mount Kenya and burned it down. Now, this is a few years ago. This is not ancient times. Okay? And what I want to talk about is, why was there no response from our keyboard warriors, our soldiers on Twitter, right? Why didn't they complain? Why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they condemn the British military for burning down the whole of Mount Kenya forest? But they will complain bitterly and condemn bitterly anytime the county government cuts down just a few trees for a project. Why is there discrepancy in the reaction? Well, like we said, Kenya is a slave society. And in slave societies, the slaves are not supposed to criticize the master. The slaves are never supposed to show the master any kind of aggression. You never show the master aggression. Okay? So, towards the master, the slave is supposed to give sympathy, empathy, love, honor, respect, and loyalty. Okay? So, and in Kenya's case, the slave master is not only a slave master, but like we said before, he's also God. The European is not only the slave and colonial master, he's also literally God. So you see, our keyboard warriors cannot fight God. They cannot criticize God. And so we keep on wondering, how can it be majority of the people are educated, appear to be literate, many people have traveled, they're exposed. How can it be that grown men still worship Mzungu as God? And you keep on wondering, how long will this system continue? At what point does it collapse? Because you thought it would have collapsed in the 1960s when the British formally withdrew from Kenya. But why didn't it collapse? Why did the Africans continue with this system? Why do they sustain it? Why do Africans build temples and then put European statues inside those temples and then worship those European statues? Why do they do that? So, as a keyboard warrior, I'm just hoping that you can see the contradiction in your behavior. And maybe the next time you want to start a Twitter fight against the government or the county government, when they cut down trees, I want you to think about the fact that the British burned down the whole of Mount Kenya forest. And maybe you can gather up your manly courage and fight them about that.